You wish to offer me a gift? Leave my existence behind. You're the most terrible parent a person could possibly endure. Those phrases lingered in the sophisticated dining area of the upscale golf club, piercing like fragments of shattered crystal and equally wounding. For an instant, the surroundings appeared to halt completely. The servers filling glasses with sparkling wine, the event coordinator going over the schedule for the following day, the inquisitive looks from Blake's folks. I, Sophia Carter, aged 58, remained utterly motionless, my arms still extended toward the arrangement of seats I had been attempting to review with my child. Amber, I murmured softly. We should go outdoors and discuss this rationally. There's no discussion needed, Amber snarled, her flawlessly applied cosmetics twisted in fury that appeared excessive for my modest proposal to relocate her delicate grandma to a spot more distant from the musicians. You constantly behave this way, attempting to dictate every detail, humiliating me before everybody. I was merely considering Grandma Helen's ear devices, I started. Cease. Simply cease. Amber's tone escalated, attracting additional notice from the bridal group assembled for the practice meal. This is my ceremony, mine alone, not yours, not Grandma's. I've put in too much effort to ensure absolute perfection. Blake, my impending husband, fidgeted awkwardly next to her, yet stayed quiet. His parents shared looks that expressed both discomfort and a kind of arrogant confirmation, as though Amber's explosion verified all their doubts regarding her background. Amber, darling, I attempted once more, conscious of the expanding crowd. I merely desire the optimal outcome for all involved tomorrow. Optimal, she scoffed, a harsh noise lacking any joy. Optimal would be your vanishing? Honestly, Mom, if you truly desire to provide me a marriage gift, just vanish from my existence. I'm tired of making excuses for you to Blake's relatives. The space fell utterly quiet. Even the servers paused mid-motion. Blake's mom, Victoria, dabbed her costly fabric serviette against her mouth, her gaze sparkling with what could pass for sympathy, but resembled triumph more closely. Amber, Blake eventually whispered, placing a soft touch on her elbow. Perhaps we ought to. No, Blake. I'm finished with the pretense. Amber shrugged away his grip, her sparkling diamond ring reflecting the illumination. Are you aware of what Victoria inquired yesterday? She wondered if my mom would feel at ease in the golf club or if she'd sense alienation, as though you're some sort of pity inclusion we're adding due to duty. I processed this detail with an odd numbness. Following 30 years of solo parenting, of extra work hours and postponed aspirations, of pinching pennies to afford ballet classes and exam preparation and legal education costs, I was being referenced as if I were a shameful kin to be endured. I understand, I stated, my tone more stable than my inner state. And how did you respond to Victoria? Amber's lack of reply spoke volumes more than any statement might. Amber has been quite accommodating and involving all parties. Victoria inserted gracefully, her elite composure unbreakable. We merely wish for tomorrow to unfold flawlessly for the two households. The two households. As if my household, essentially just myself and aging Grandma Helen, somehow matched the Prescotts with their inherited wealth and traditional entries to prestigious universities. It shall be flawless, I promised her, with a grin that demanded all my strength to form. Now, if you'll pardon me, I believe I require fresh air. I exited the dining space with my posture erect and chin lifted, sensing the burden of their stares. Only upon entering the deserted women's lounge did I permit myself to collapse into a plush seat, my fingers trembling as the complete force of my child's statements struck me. You're the most terrible parent a person could endure. Was that true? I gazed at my image in the elaborate mirror. A lady with dark hair streaked in silver, styled in a functional shortcut, dressed in an outfit from a retail chain that I devoted hours to choosing. Not elegant like Victoria Prescott with her professionally tended golden locks, but neither the disgrace Amber had depicted. I reflected on the past years, the costumes for Halloween stitched during late hours, the meals for school prepared with personal messages, the packages for university filled with comforts, the discreet encouragement during Amber's initial romantic disappointment. I'd committed errors, without doubt all guardians do, but the most terrible parent a person could endure. My device vibrated with a message from Amber. Where have you gone? The coordinator requires reviewing your entry schedule once more. No regret, no recognition of the harsh statements still echoing within my mind. Merely irritation that I wasn't performing my designated part in her ideal spectacle. I responded via text, feeling unwell, heading home to recuperate prior to tomorrow. All will proceed smoothly. As I traveled back to the humble home with 3 bedrooms where I'd nurtured Amber by myself after her dad concluded that parenting restricted his way of living too much, I caught myself contemplating the residence on the opposite side of the community where Amber and Blake resided currently. The lovely traditional-style dwelling that had been my dad's, bequeathed to me following his passing 3 years prior, with explicit directions that I might convey it to Amber at an appropriate moment. I'd permitted them to occupy it right away, intending to transfer the title as a marriage present, a new beginning free from loan payments. Amber had never inquired about this setup, had never questioned the ownership of the place. She'd merely taken it for granted, as she'd consistently accepted my concessions with a sense of rightfulness that I'd confused for self-assurance. At the residence, I removed my practical footwear and settled at my cooking area table, encircled by arrangements for the ceremony. My attire for the bride's parent displayed on the utility room entrance. The custom-made register for visitors I'd devoted weeks to assembling. The contingency set of adhesive for clothing and pain relievers and bandages I'd put together for the next day. Disappear from my existence, I murmured to the vacant space, sampling how the phrase felt on my lips. Disappear from my existence. Maybe after all this time, it was appropriate to grant my child precisely what she'd demanded. I extended my arm toward my computer, activated it, and started composing. The early sunlight streaming through my sleeping chamber drapes discovered me already alert, my eyes irritated from an evening alternating between weeping and organized strategizing. My device showed 17 unanswered calls and 23 text notifications, mostly from Amber, becoming progressively desperate as the hours passed. Mom, the coordinator needs to verify your styling session timing. Mom, are you genuinely ignoring me? The practice isn't concluded yet. Mother, this is absurd. Contact me immediately. And lastly, dispatched at 2:17 a.m. All right, act like that. But you'd better arrive at the location by 10 a.m. tomorrow, or I promise I'll never pardon you. I placed the device down and proceeded to my wardrobe, shifting aside the protective cover holding my bride's parent gown, a gentle azure fabric I'd economized for months to purchase. In its place, I selected everyday garments, denim pants, a cozy pullover, easy footwear. Today demanded practicality, not formality. At my compact cooking area table, I examined the papers I'd collected during the night. Ownership records, financial summaries, agreements with ceremony suppliers, and decades of monetary logs neatly arranged in my traditional storage system. The documented evidence of parental concessions revealed in clear print. My dad had worked as a bookkeeper, and he instilled in me the value of records. Individuals can dispute your statements, he'd remark, but they can't challenge figures how correct he proved to be. I placed my initial call at exactly 7 a.m. to Jonathan Mills, my dad's lawyer and the administrator of his estate. Sophia, is all well? Isn't today the grand ceremony? His recognizable tone conveyed worry. There's been an alteration in intentions, Jonathan. I must address the residence on Maple Avenue, the one presently inhabited by my child and her betrothed. Your dad's place? I believed you intended to convey the title to Amber as a ceremony present. Intentions evolve, I answered, my tone more composed than my emotions. I'd like to consider alternatives for disposing of the asset. Promptly, a hesitation. Sophia, is everything all right? This appears abrupt. I've experienced an insight, Jonathan, concerning dignity, limits, and the genuine essence of presenting gifts. I looked at the ownership record in front of me. The dwelling remains lawfully under my ownership, right? Yes, definitely. Your dad bequeathed it to you without stipulations. His recommendation regarding conveying it to Amber was merely that, a recommendation. Lawfully, you're at liberty to sell it if you desire. And what would constitute the quickest feasible schedule for such a transaction? Jonathan cleared his throat mildly. Well, In the current economy, with an appealing asset like that, if you're open to a marginally reduced price proposal, I know various buyers who acquire with immediate payment and few conditions. We might conceivably finalize in as few as 48 hours. Ideal. Kindly initiate the contacts. I'll visit your workplace at midday to authorize whatever is required. My subsequent call was to Margaret Willis, the ceremony organizer Amber had chosen for her ideal event, a lady whose expertise I was funding even though Amber permitted Blake's relatives to think they were making substantial contributions. Mrs. Carter, I was preparing to contact you. We noticed your absence at the conclusion of the practice yesterday evening. And there are several particulars. Margaret, I cut in politely. I'm sorry, but there's been a major modification. I require you to notify all suppliers and terminate today's occasion. Quiet, then a stumbling reply. Terminate? Mrs. Carter, the ceremony is in 6 hours. That's not we can't conceivably verify your agreement, Margaret. Portion 7, Segment 3 indicates that as the monetarily accountable individual, I hold the authority to terminate with reimbursement for the supplier's effort and supplies. I recognize there will be considerable termination charges. I'm ready to cover them entirely. But the bride, Ms. Carter, will be heartbroken. I'm certain she will. I concurred, recalling the malice in Amber's tone. You're the most terrible parent a person could endure. Nonetheless, kindly continue with the terminations. Every one of them. Location, food service, blooms, tunes, imagery, all. Following concluding the discussion with the entirely flustered ceremony organizer, I progressed methodically through my agenda. The food provider, the flower arranger, the classical ensemble, the image capturer. With each discussion, I serenely presented myself as the contracting entity, cited the appropriate termination provision, and approved whatever compensations were essential to offset the 11th hour shift. By 9:30 a.m., I had disassembled every element of the $75,000 ceremony I devoted 2 years to funding. My pension fund was notably diminished. But an odd feeling of tranquility had enveloped me. My device persisted in vibrating with incoming discussions. Amber, the ceremony organizer, even Blake on one occasion, but I permitted them all to transfer to recorded messages as I assembled a bag for overnight and collected the papers I'd arranged during the dark hours. The concluding task on my morning's plan was maybe the toughest. I contacted my aging parent, who had been eagerly anticipating witnessing her sole grandchild proceed down the pathway. Mom, I stated when she responded, there's been an alteration in plans concerning the ceremony. What's occurred, Sophia? Is Amber okay? Amber is bodily sound, I guaranteed her. But the ceremony won't occur today. I'll clarify all later, but presently I need you to have faith in me. A hesitation, then my parent's voice, gentler but assured. I've consistently had faith in you, Sophia. You're the most dependable individual I know. Her straightforward belief almost shattered my poise. Thank you, Mom. That signifies more than you realize at this moment. As I concluded the discussion, my entrance bell sounded with a persistence that could solely belong to one individual. I inhaled deeply, aligned my posture, and unlocked the entrance to confront my child. Amber positioned herself on my veranda in high-end athletic wear and a costly top, her features reddened with ire and her gaze frantic with alarm. Mom, what on earth? I've been trying to reach you throughout the night. The stylists for hair and face are already at the site, and Margaret claims she can't contact you. And she halted suddenly, observing my informal attire and the prepared bag evident in the corridor behind me. Why aren't you prepared? We must depart for the site in approximately an hour. I examined my child's features, the features I'd committed to memory as an infant, soothed after numerous youthful harms, observed develop into attractive maturity. The features that had distorted with disdain merely hours earlier as she openly dismissed 28 years of parental commitment. There's been an alteration in plans, Amber, I stated softly. The ceremony has been terminated. Her look solidified, then morphed into a blend of terror and fury. What do you mean? Terminated? That's not you can't. She shoved past me into the dwelling, already retrieving her device. I must contact Margaret immediately and resolve whatever misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I cut in, securing the entrance after her. I reached out to every supplier this morning and ended their involvement. The site, the food service, the blooms, everything. Amber pivoted toward me gradually, her features losing hue. You did what? You can't do that. It's my ceremony. In fact, I can. And I did. Every agreement was under my name, with my authorization, funded by my resources. I don't comprehend, she murmured, her tone abruptly diminutive. Why would you inflict this on me? I held her stare steadily. Yesterday evening, you presented a plea. You requested me to offer you a present, to vanish from your existence. You labeled me the most terrible parent a person could endure. The phrases still pained, but my tone stayed balanced. I've resolved to respect your plea. This is the initial phase. Amber's device started to chime. Blake's signal. She responded with shaking fingers. Blake, something's amiss. My mom claims she terminated the ceremony. I don't grasp what's transpiring. I could perceive his voice. Faint through the audio, similarly perplexed and progressively worried. I motioned for Amber to accompany me into the cooking area, where I'd displayed the records of my nocturnal labor. I must depart, Amber informed Blake suddenly. Come to my mom's residence now. She terminated the discussion and gazed at the documents arrayed across my cooking area table. What is all this? This, I stated, selecting the initial folder. Is the reality concerning your ideal existence? What are you referring to? What reality? Amber's tone fluctuated between ire and apprehension as she gazed at the assortment of documents spread across my cooking area table. Kindly take a seat, I stated, indicating a seat. For once, Amber obeyed without dispute. Maybe too astonished by the termination revelation to oppose, I chose the initial folder marked ceremony and unveiled it. This holds every agreement, payment receipt, and transaction verification for the ceremony that won't transpire today. Total outlay $78,452.36. All disbursed from my funds. Amber's gaze expanded. But Blake's parents provided nothing. I completed for her. Despite what you allowed them to assume, a redness ascended her neck. I never declared they were funding. They simply presumed, and it was simpler to permit them to believe that I couldn't manage to provide my child a suitable ceremony, I added. That you were kindly incorporating your shameful parent, despite the economic strain it imposed on you and Blake's relatives. The precise strike connected. Amber's redness intensified. It wasn't that way. It was precisely that way, Amber. I extracted a particular record, an electronic message from Victoria Prescott to the golf club's occasion manager that Amber had inadvertently sent to me months earlier. Your prospective parent-in-law explicitly noted how generous Blake was to support such a lavish gathering when the bride's relatives evidently couldn't handle it. Amber's gaze darted from mine. Victoria is just she expresses things occasionally. It doesn't signify anything. And you never rectified her. It wasn't an inquiry. You permitted Blake's relatives to think I was some faltering, unrefined load you were enduring out of responsibility. Mom, you're exaggerating. The ceremony is in a few hours. We can address this afterward. There is no ceremony, Amber. Not today. I secured the ceremony folder and unveiled the subsequent one marked learning. What is all this? Amber insisted, her tone rising. Some sort of bizarre collection of economic self-sacrifice. Records, I amended serenely. Something your grandpa instructed me the importance of long ago. I withdrew a pile of fee receipts, borrowing papers, and fund transfers. Your schooling, exclusive primary institution, when the local public facility was inadequate, $124,000. Exam preparation and university submission guidance, $8,700. Bachelor's qualification at Northeastern, $183,000. Legal training at Boston University, $213,550. I positioned another record atop, a borrowing settlement notice. The educational debts you believe Blake's dad covertly settled as a completion present? That was me converting the savings portfolio I'd sustained since prior to your birth. Amber gazed at the documents, her look transitioning from resistance to bewilderment. But Mr. Prescott stated he informed Blake he deceived, evidently. Or maybe Blake deceived you. Regardless, I'm the one who guaranteed you completed without obligations, not the Prescotts. I touched the borrowing settlement notice. The crucial aspect isn't who disbursed Amber, it's that you never once probed it. You merely took it as given that someone had mysteriously resolved your economic issue without ever pondering it could have been your shameful parent. The entrance bell chimed, sharp and demanding. Blake, without doubt. Don't respond yet, I stated, unveiling the third and most important folder. There's one additional matter we must address before Blake arrives. What now? Amber inquired, her tone smaller than previously. More proof of what a dreadful child I am? No, I answered, pushing the ownership record across the table. Proof of what you're on the verge of forfeiting? Amber looked at the paper, her forehead creasing. The residence title? Why are you displaying this to me? Examine the proprietor's name, Amber. She reviewed the paper, then glanced up, true puzzlement in her gaze. I don't grasp. Why is your name on our residence title? Because it's not your residence. It never was. I maintained my tone mild despite the seriousness of what I was disclosing. The residence on Maple Avenue was your grandpa's. When he passed 3 years ago, he bequeathed it to me. The entrance bell chimed again, accompanied by rapping. Amber scarcely appeared to register, her focus locked on the title in her shaking fingers. But we've resided there since prior to our commitment. You claimed it was my legacy. I claimed it was portion of your grandpa's heritage that would ultimately transfer to you. I amended. I permitted you and Blake to settle in assuming I would convey possession to you as a ceremony present. I never demanded rent from you. Never requested contributions for the asset fees or coverage I've been covering. So the residence is yours? Amber's tone had acquired an odd empty quality. Yes. And as of this morning, it's being disposed of. I positioned the initial sale contract beside the title. The finalization will occur Monday morning. Amber's features lost all color. You're disposing of our residence? You can't do that. All our possessions, our existence. We just completed updating the cooking area with my funds, I reminded her. The $45,000 borrowing from your grandpa's holdings that you never probed, that originated straight from my pension savings. The rapping at the front entrance intensified. I rose and proceeded toward it, pausing to glance back at my child, still immobilized in astonishment at my cooking area table, surrounded by the documented trail of parental concessions she'd accepted as certain. You should ready Blake for what he's about to discover, I suggested. It might be simpler originating from you. I unlocked the entrance to discover Blake on my veranda, his attractive features lined with bewilderment and concern. Behind him, his parents were emerging from their high-end vehicle. Victoria's look a combination of worry and barely hidden interest. Sophia, Blake started, his tone lowered as if conveying delicate details. There appears to be some mix-up about the ceremony. The location contacted my mom, stating everything had been terminated, but that can't be accurate. Amber's not responding to her device. And Blake, I cut in mildly. Amber is indoors. There's no mix-up. The ceremony has truly been terminated, and there are some additional issues you all need to know about. I moved aside, motioning for him to come in. Please enter. You as well, Richard Victoria. This involves every one of you. Blake paused, obviously detecting something major was developing, but then advanced past me into the dwelling. His parents proceeded more warily, Victoria's judgmental stare scanning over my simple home as if inventorying its shortcomings. Amber, Blake summoned, his tone strained with concern. In the cooking area, I guided, trailing behind the Prescott relatives as they advanced through my sitting room with its basic decor and family images. When we accessed the cooking area, Amber was still positioned where I'd left her. But now, tears flowed down her features as she grasped the ownership record in quivering fingers. Amber, darling, what's the matter? Blake hurried to her side, dropping to one knee beside her seat. What's transpiring? Amber glanced up at him, then at his parents lingering uncertainly in the entryway, then ultimately at me. In that instant, her gaze contained something I hadn't witnessed in years. Awareness. Not of me as her shameful parent or convenient financier, but awareness of what she had committed, what she had expressed, and what was now developing consequently. Mom is disposing of our residence, she murmured to Blake. It was never ours whatsoever. Blake's bewilderment deepened. What are you referring to? But naturally it's ours. We've resided there for 2 years. In reality, I cut in. That's the initial issue we need to clarify. As the Prescotts assembled around my cooking area table, I commenced the methodical deconstruction of the meticulously built story that had enabled Amber to present herself as Blake's peer in prosperity and standing. A story constructed wholly on my quiet concessions and her intentional oversights. The residence was merely the start. "Mrs. Carter," Richard Prescott commenced, his commanding deep voice carrying the assurance of a gentleman used to dominating any setting he accessed. "While I comprehend there may be some household conflict occurring here, certainly terminating the whole ceremony is an exaggeration. There are 200 attendees, many who have journeyed." "Dad, hold on." Blake cut in, his focus fixed on the ownership record Amber still held. "What's this concerning our residence?" Victoria advanced nearer, looking over her son's shoulder at the paper. Her impeccably cared-for traits shifted from bewilderment to something sterner as understanding emerged. "The residence is in Sophia's name, but you informed us it was your legacy, Amber." All gazes turned to my child, who appeared to diminish in her seat. "I never precisely stated that," she muttered. "I just didn't correct specific presumptions." "Presumptions you intentionally fostered," I added softly. "Just as you fostered the presumption that you and Blake were funding the ceremony." Victoria's head jerked up. "What does that signify?" "Blake informed us you demanded to cover everything according to custom." "I did cover everything." I verified. Every payment, every supplier, every aspect of the now terminated occasion. $78,452.36 to be exact. Richard Prescott's jaw clenched. "That's inconceivable. The location alone is $22,000 for the day plus $7,500 for the superior food package and $4,200 for the unlimited drinks." I completed for him, pushing the agreement across the table. "All dispersed from my funds." Blake pivoted to Amber, confusion clear in his look. "But you claimed your mom could only provide a symbolic sum and that my parents were managing the primary costs while we handled the remainder." Another inventive version of truth, I observed. My tone controlled despite the resentment brewing underneath. "The truth is that I've converted investments, obtained a borrowing against my retirement plan, and exhausted most of my reserves to provide Amber the ceremony she insisted upon." Victoria's features had changed from doubtful to furious. "So all those gatherings where you politely expressed gratitude for our kindness were founded on a fabrication," I verified, "one that Amber sustained, permitting you to think I was economically and socially insufficient." "Mom, halt." Amber begged, tears flowing now. "You're portraying it so premeditated. Wasn't it?" I inquired plainly. "Yesterday evening, you instructed me to vanish from your existence. You labeled me the most terrible parent a person could endure. All because I proposed relocating your grandma to a spot where she might truly perceive the ceremony she assisted in funding." Blake rose suddenly, passing his fingers through his locks in a motion of anguish. "I don't comprehend. Why would you deceive about this, Amber? About your mom covering everything, about the residence." "I didn't deceive," Amber maintained. "I just didn't clarify everything. Your parents are so critical about finances, about position. They were already disparaging Mom for being a lone parent, for her occupation, for everything. If they knew the reality, that your parent is considerably more economically accountable and generous than you depicted her." Richard Prescott cut in, his tone shifting from commanding to coldly logical. "That she possesses the residence you've been portraying as yours. That she funded the schooling you assert to have awards for?" I glanced at Richard, astonished by this precise evaluation. Perhaps Blake's dad was more insightful than his elite exterior indicated. "The awards were authentic," Amber objected feebly. "They just didn't encompass everything. They encompassed roughly 12% of your overall educational costs." I amended, touching the learning folder. "I encompassed the remainder." Blake traversed the small cooking area, visibly digesting these disclosures. "So, the residence updates we've been performing were funded by a $45,000 borrowing from me that Amber has never referenced reimbursing," I verified. "The borrowing that supported the cooking area you crafted specifically to impress your mom, Victoria." Victoria reddened mildly at this direct mention. I never requested for no, you didn't. I concurred. But you did remark during your initial visit that the original cooking area was delightfully vintage, by which you meant obsolete. Within a week, Amber was imploring me for funds to refurbish it. I pivoted to my child, whose tears had yielded to a kind of dazed astonishment. Amber, for years I've observed you distort yourself to satisfy the Prescott standards, altering how you attire, how you communicate, even reauthoring your individual history to appear more compatible with their elite group. I expressed nothing, assuming it was a stage you'd surpass. But yesterday evening clarified that you've progressed beyond adjustment to complete denial of who you are and your origins. That's not just, Amber murmured. No, it's not, I concurred. None of this is just. It's not just that I labored 2 positions to nurture you solo after your dad decided parenting was too limiting. It's not just that I've depleted my pension to support your goals. And it's certainly not just that after all that you're embarrassed of me. Blake had ceased traversing, his look solidifying as he regarded Amber with fresh perspective. You informed me your parent declined to contribute to our initial payment when we were examining dwellings in Beacon Hill. That's why we accepted residing in your grandpa's old residence. Another inventive version, I verified. The reality is, Amber never inquired me about an initial payment because she knew I'd already extended myself thinly, settling her legal training debts. The debts you think your dad settled, Blake. Richard Prescott cleared his throat, appearing distinctly uneasy. I never claimed I settled any debts. I simply congratulated Amber on becoming obligation-free and permitted your son to think you were accountable, I observed. An intriguing similarity to Amber's own selective realities. The cooking area became silent as the complete ramifications settled over everyone. Victoria Prescott, despite her clear aversion to the circumstance, appeared almost impressed by the systematic manner I was deconstructing Amber's meticulously built facade. So, what occurs now? Blake eventually inquired, his tone taut with restrained feeling. The ceremony is terminated. The residence is being disposed of. Are you filing charges for deception or something? No, I stated, softening mildly at the authentic anguish in his features. There's no deception here, Blake. Just a child who is embarrassed of her parent and a parent who ultimately realized no quantity of concession would ever suffice. But the residence, Amber started, will be disposed of on Monday to an immediate payment purchaser I completed for her. You and Blake have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to extract your personal items. Anything remaining will be contributed. You can't do this, Amber wept, ultimately rediscovering her tone. Where are we expected to go? All our acquaintances think we're uniting today. We can't just you'll resolve it, I cut in, mirroring the dismissive expression she'd employed numerous times when I'd voiced worries about ceremony expenses. Perhaps the Prescotts will provide you a location to reside while you reorganize. Victoria and Richard shared glances that implied this was not an assured outcome. The household interactions were evidently shifting instantly as Blake reassessed not just his connection with Amber, but his comprehension of his own parents' part in sustaining certain fabrications. I still don't comprehend, Blake stated, pivoting to me with authentic bewilderment. Why no? Why not challenge Amber about all this prior to today? I pondered his inquiry carefully, aware that my response would influence how all of them, including Amber, comprehended my actions. Because until yesterday evening, I thought the concessions were worthwhile, I answered truthfully. I convinced myself that parenting involves prioritizing your offspring's requirements, that Amber's joy was paramount. But when she stared directly at me and instructed me to vanish from her existence, when she labeled me the most terrible parent a person could endure, something fractured. Not merely my spirit, but the illusion that my concession was shaping her into a superior individual. It wasn't. It was facilitating her to become someone who could regard others, regard me as expendable. Amber recoiled as if I'd struck her. I'm not doing this to penalize you, Amber, I proceeded more mildly. I'm doing this because you requested a present, for me to vanish from your existence. I'm granting you precisely what you demanded. The residence disposal merely guarantees I can commence my fresh existence elsewhere, as you insisted. Where will you proceed? Richard inquired unexpectedly. I held his stare, noticing a spark of something like admiration in his gaze. I've always desired to reside near the sea. Tomorrow, I'm traveling to the Carolina shoreline to examine small properties by the water. Half the earnings from the residence will support my fresh beginning. The other half has already been contributed to an organization aiding lone parents seeking advanced learning. Victoria emitted a small noise, something between a breath and unwilling respect. You've certainly been comprehensive in your reaction to Amber's conduct. Effectiveness is essential when you've devoted decades performing the duties of two guardians, I answered plainly. Now, I think we've addressed the vital details. You all have important issues to handle. Informing attendees, locating new lodging, reevaluating specific connections. I need to complete assembling my things. I rose, indicating that the discussion was concluded. The Prescotts stood somewhat hesitantly, but Amber stayed seated, gazing at the documents that detailed her lifetime of accepted concessions. Mom, she murmured. You can't just depart. In fact, I can, I amended mildly. You specifically requested me to before observers less than 24 hours ago. I didn't intend it that way. I was pressured about the ceremony, about everything being flawless, and now you're pressured about having no ceremony and no residence. I noted. Actions have repercussions, Amber. It's time you encountered some of yours. As I guided the stunned group toward my front entrance, I sensed an odd buoyancy starting to supplant the heavy acceptance that had weighed on me for years. For the first time in Amber's existence, I had prioritized my own welfare over her demands. And somehow, the world hadn't collapsed. It had simply transformed into something more truthful, more equilibrated, and I was ultimately prepared to accept it. The hours after the Prescott's exit developed in a dreamlike fog. I systematically persisted in my assembling, sorting through decades of gathered items with a detachment that astonished me. Family image collections, meticulously saved creations from Amber's youth, seasonal ornaments affectionately accumulated over years of establishing customs for just us two. All of it demanded choices. What to retain, what to contribute, what to store. My device vibrated relentlessly with communications and calls from perplexed ceremony attendees who'd reached an unoccupied site. From my sibling in Phoenix demanding clarifications, from Amber alternating between weepy entreaties and furious charges, I muted it all, concentrating instead on the functional duties before me. By late afternoon, an unusual serenity had enveloped me. I positioned myself on my rear veranda with a mug of herbal drink, observing the sunset color the heavens in hues I hadn't truly valued in years. Tomorrow, I would start traveling toward a fresh existence. Tonight, I would grant myself this instant of contemplation. The noise of wheels on my driveway disrupted the quiet. I didn't need to check to identify who it was. The tentative rap that ensued verified it. It's unlocked, I summoned, staying seated as my aging parent navigated through the dwelling to join me on the veranda. Helen Carter progressed slowly nowadays, her formerly upright stance now bent with years, but her gaze stayed keen as always. At 83, she had endured the economic downturn of the 1930s, laid to rest 2 spouses, and nurtured 3 offspring, one of whom, my sibling Robert. She had also laid to rest after a vehicle collision in his 20s. If anyone comprehended life's unforeseeable harshnesses and surprising favors, it was my parent. Well, she stated without introduction, settling into the seat beside me, Alice Thompson reached out to me. Said the golf club was fully adorned with no bride or groom present. Care to explain what's transpiring? I grinned faintly. The local rumor network stayed as effective as ever. I terminated the ceremony, I verified and disposed of the residence Amber and Blake have been occupying, and I'm departing tomorrow for the Carolina shoreline. My parent processed this detail with remarkable composure, nodding mildly. Figured it could be something similar. Amber ultimately exceeded boundaries, didn't she? The straightforward recognition that my parent had identified the pattern of conduct I'd been tolerating for years brought unforeseen tears to my gaze. She instructed me to vanish from her existence, I stated softly. Labeled me the most terrible parent a person could endure. Helen huffed. Absurd. I've witnessed poor parents, Sophia. Women who deserted their offspring, who selected partners or substances over their infants, who caused bodily and emotional harm without regret. You're not even in the same realm as those women. I recognize that. I admitted mentally at least. But hearing those phrases from my own child after everything fractured something essential. My parent completed for me. A connection you believed was indestructible. Yes, the plain word carried the burden of my shattered illusions about unconditional parental affection. The falsehood that a parent's concession would always be compensated with a child's gratitude. Helen extended her arm with her twisted hand, patting mine mildly. Inform me about the Carolina shoreline. The sudden shift in topic was so characteristic of my pragmatic parent that I couldn't help grinning. I've been investigating small neighborhoods near Wilmington, serene locations with shore access and fair asset values. I can manage something simple with the residents' earnings. Good angling in that region, Helen remarked. Your dad and I passed a week there once before your birth. Tranquil, different pace from here. We sat in easy quiet for a few minutes, observing the light diminish from the heavens. Ultimately, Helen posed the question I'd been anticipating. What occurs with Amber now? I exhaled, the weight of parental worry not wholly dispelled despite yesterday's harsh phrases. I don't know. The functional matters are evident. She and Blake need to secure new lodging, manage the ceremony termination, address the deceptions she's told. But the individual connection, I drifted off uncertain. Requires time, my parent provided. Separation can bring clarity for both of you. Are you upset with me? I inquired abruptly. For terminating the ceremony, for disposing of the residents, for departing? Helen pondered this with the deliberation that had always defined her. Disheartened perhaps, not in your actions, but in the circumstance that made them essential. No grandma desires to witness her family broken. But upset? No. You've supported Amber single-handedly since she was 5 years old. Even birds urge their young from the shelter eventually. This feels less like urging from the shelter and more like cutting off a branch, I confessed. Agonizing either way, Helen recognized, but sometimes essential for development, hers and yours. Before I could reply, lights swept across the yard as another automobile entered my driveway. This time, I identified Blake's practical car. Reinforcements have appeared, I see, my parent noted wryly. Want me to dismiss him? I grinned at the guarding impulse. No, I'll converse with him. Would you mind preparing some fresh herbal drink? Helen nodded, rising with practiced resolve. Don't let him alter your decision, Sophia. You've made the correct choice. I observed her proceed inside before directing my attention to Blake, who neared the veranda with evident reluctance. In the diminishing light, he appeared younger than his 30 years, more like the sincere legal pupil Amber had first introduced than the refined lawyer he'd evolved into under the Prescott's guidance. Mrs. Carter, he addressed me cautiously. I hope I'm not interrupting. That depends on why you're here, Blake, I answered, motioning to the seat my parent had left. He sat, passing his fingers through his locks in that recognizable motion of anguish. I don't even know how to start. Today has been unreal. I imagine it has. I recognized finding out your ceremony is terminated, your home is being disposed of, and your betrothed has misrepresented fundamental aspects of your life together, all before midday on what was supposed to be your ceremony day. Blake grimaced. When you express it that way, he breathed out heavily. I'm not here to request you to change your decision about the residence or the ceremony. I comprehend why you've made these choices. This astonished me. Do you? I think so, he stated slowly. After you presented everything this morning, I had a lengthy conversation with my parents, then with Amber. Things became clearer. In what manner? Blake gazed at his hands for an instant. My whole connection with Amber has been constructed on certain assumptions about her history, her assets, her principles. Discovering that she deliberately encouraged misconceptions, that she was embarrassed of you to the extent of building elaborate stories, he shook his head. It makes me doubt everything, including whether you wish to wed her, I proposed mildly. He glanced up, his look troubled. Is it incorrect that I'm posing that question to myself after 4 years together on what was supposed to be our ceremony day? Better today than tomorrow, I suggested. Or next year when offspring might be involved. Blake nodded slowly. My parents have secured a room at the Grand Hotel in the city center. They've offered to allow us to reside there while we sort things out. Amber is not managing things well. I wouldn't anticipate her to, I recognized. Her meticulously built world is crumbling. She keeps claiming you'll change your decision. That once you've made your statement, you'll terminate the residence disposal and assist us rearrange the ceremony. He examined my features carefully. But you won't, will you? No, I verified. The residence disposal is advancing. The ceremony suppliers have been compensated their termination charges, and tomorrow I'm departing for the Carolina shoreline. Blake processed this with a thoughtful nod. I thought as much. For what it's worth, Mrs. Carter, I'm regretful, not just for how today has developed, but for my part in permitting Amber's misrepresentations to persist. I should have probed things more thoroughly. The regret surprised me with its maturity and self-insight. Perhaps there was more depth to Blake than I'd credited beneath the Prescott refinement. We all have our oversights, Blake, especially concerning those we care for. My parent appeared with the herbal drink tray, placing it on the small table between us. Evening, Blake, she addressed him with minimal cordiality. Interesting day you've had, Mrs. Carter, the elder, he recognized with a mild grin. That's certainly one way to describe it. Helen poured herbal drink with practiced skill. And what are your intentions now, young man, besides imposing on my daughter's final evening before her departure? Mother, I reprimanded mildly, though I valued her guarding impulse. Blake accepted the herbal drink with a respectful nod. Honestly, I'm uncertain. Everything I thought I knew about my connection, my future, it's all in doubt now. Good, Helen declared firmly. Questions lead to superior answers than presumptions. Blake grinned faintly at this blunt insight. My dad expressed something similar earlier today. We sipped our herbal drink in surprisingly easy quiet as darkness fully covered the yard. Ultimately, Blake placed his mug down with a decisive sound. I should depart. Amber is at the hotel, and there's much to discuss. He rose, extending his hand first to Helen, then to me. Thank you for conversing with me and for the clarity you've provided, however painfully it emerged. After he departed, Helen and I stayed on the veranda, the night noises creating a serene backdrop to our reflections. He seems less superficial than I anticipated, my parent noted. Yes, I concurred. Though whether that's sufficient to endure this crisis with Amber remains to be determined. That's their path now, Helen stated firmly. Yours lies elsewhere. She patted my hand again. South, specifically towards sunlight and ocean breeze and existence, where you're not constantly funding other people's aspirations. I grinned at her typical straightforwardness. Will you be all right without me close? Fishing about for an invitation to accompany you? She joked. Don't concern yourself with me. Alice Thompson and I have a regular card game on Thursdays, and the elder facility keeps me occupied sufficiently. Besides, they created telephones for a purpose. As we sat together in companionable quiet, I felt the first genuine stirrings of enthusiasm about tomorrow's journey. For decades, my identity had been defined primarily through parenting, through Amber's requirements, accomplishments, and demands. Now at 58, I was finally free to uncover who Sophia Carter might be when not perceived through the perspective of parental duty. It was frightening. It was freeing. It was perhaps overdue. Sunday morning arrived with the gentle clarity that follows a tempest. Both the actual storm that had passed through overnight and the sentimental whirlwind of the prior day. I awoke early, my sleeping chamber already partially disassembled, vital items packed in the vehicle I'd leased for the One Direction drive to North Carolina. My parent had insisted on remaining the night, claiming worry about the climate, but transparently desiring to prolong our time together before my exit. Now she sat at my cooking area table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching as I made concluding preparations. You'll contact when you arrive at each stop, she inquired, not for the first time. I planned it out. You should reach Richmond by dusk if you depart within the hour. Yes, Mom, I answered. The familiar pattern of guardian-offspring concern now curiously inverted. I've got lodging bookings in Richmond tonight and Wilmington tomorrow. I'll report in with consistent updates. Good, she nodded resolutely. And you have the property agent's number? The one I suggested in Carolina Beach? Entered in my contacts and we've already traded messages, I guaranteed her. She's arranged 3 assets to display me on Tuesday. Helen seemed content, though I could perceive the feeling she was striving to contain. My parent had never been expressive, having been nurtured in a period when resilience was viewed as a merit, but her emotions ran profound beneath the functional surface. "I'm proud of you, Sophia," she expressed suddenly, catching me unprepared. "Not many individuals have the bravery to begin anew at 58. "I'm not certain it's bravery so much as requirement," I confessed, halting in my preparations. I couldn't remain here, continuing as if nothing had altered. Not after what Amber expressed, not after realizing how she truly perceives me. Sometimes the most brave acts are those we undertake because we have no alternative. Helen noted, "Your dad used to say that authentic character is revealed not when everything is proceeding smoothly, but when the bases shake beneath your feet." The reference to my dad, gone 15 years now, brought a bittersweet grin. He'd be horrified by the way Amber has behaved completely. Helen concurred without pause. "But he'd be enormously proud of you, as am I." This simple affirmation, parent to offspring, across the age divide, provided unexpected solace to the still tender wound of Amber's denial. At least one parental connection in our family remained whole, grounded in mutual esteem rather than utilization. By 9 o'clock, my vehicle was loaded with necessities. Attire, crucial papers, treasured volumes, and the few family treasures I couldn't bear to abandon. Everything else would either be contributed or stored until I established my new residence. "It's time," I informed my parent, checking my timepiece. "I need to visit Maple Avenue before heading to the roadway." Helen's brows lifted. "You're going to the residence? Is that prudent? Essential?" "Not prudent," I clarified. "I need to verify that Amber and Blake have extracted their items as directed. The new proprietors want empty occupancy, and the finalization is tomorrow morning. Jonathan will manage the documents in my absence." "And if they haven't cleared out," Helen inquired functionally, "then what stays becomes part of the contribution I've organized." I answered, my tone firmer than I felt. The cutoff was clear. Helen nodded, honoring my choice despite her obvious concern. "I'll follow in my vehicle so I can drive myself home afterward." The morning was luminous and clear as we made the 15-minute drive across the community to the dignified traditional dwelling on Maple Avenue that had been my dad's delight. Pulling into the driveway, I noted immediately that Blake's vehicle was missing, though signs of rushed assembling were apparent. Discarded wrapping supplies on the front grass, the storage entrance slightly open revealing partially vacant shelves. "Looks like they've been active," Helen noted as we approached the front entrance. Using my key, an ownership action that still felt instinctive despite the asset's impending transfer, I entered the dwelling that had been in our family for 2 generations. The immediate impression was one of forsaken disorder. Empty hooks for pictures on walls, rectangular dust marks where furnishings had stood, scattered packaging materials across floors. "They've removed the major items," I remarked, moving through the entryway into the sitting room. Though their maintenance leaves something to be desired, Amber was never one for tidying her own disarrays, Helen commented dryly. Literally or figuratively. Room by room, we inspected the hastily emptied dwelling. The cooking area, recently refurbished at my cost, stood strangely vacant, costly devices shining in contrast to the remnants of swift exit. Upstairs, storage spaces hung open with scattered hooks. Bathroom storage displayed forsaken personal care items considered not worth assembling, and trash containers overflowed with discarded possessions. In what had been Amber and Blake's sleeping chamber, a peculiar sight awaited, a tidy stack of image collections placed deliberately in the center of the floor where their bed had stood. I recognized them immediately. The carefully curated assortment of Amber's youth photographs I'd assembled over years, documenting everything from initial steps to legal training completion. "She left your image collections," Helen noted, her tone indecipherable. So she did. I knelt beside the stack, opening the top collection to a page showcasing 7-year-old Amber proudly displaying her first missing tooth. The gap-toothed grin, so pure and sincere, bore little resemblance to the composed, calculating woman who had instructed me to vanish from her existence. "Are you taking them with you?" Helen inquired. I considered the inquiry seriously, weighing the sentimental importance against the functional limitations of my already packed vehicle. More importantly, I examined my own feelings about carrying these physical reminders of a connection now fundamentally changed. No, I decided ultimately. I'll retain a few special images, but these collections belong to the past, to a connection that no longer exists in the form these pictures celebrate. Helen nodded, comprehension in her gaze. The tidying team arrives tomorrow. Yes, before the new proprietor's inspection, I verified, rising to my feet. They'll extract anything remaining and ready the dwelling for its new family. We continued our examination, reaching the small home workspace that had been my dad's domain, and more recently Blake's remote work area. The desk was gone, but a single envelope remained propped against the window ledge, my name inscribed across it in Blake's exact script. With a sense of interest rather than fear, I opened it. Sophia, by the time you read this, we will have emptied the dwelling as directed. I want to express gratitude for the kindness you've shown over the years. Kindness I didn't fully grasp until yesterday. Amber and I have had challenging conversations since departing your residence. She is struggling to reconcile her actions with her self-perception, which I believe will be a prolonged process. For my part, I am reevaluating many aspects of our connection and the foundations upon which we've built our life together. I don't know what the future holds for Amber and me, but I wanted you to know that your actions, while agonizing, have created an opportunity for necessary truth. Whatever happens next, that truth is valuable. I've ensured we've extracted all personal items. The image collections in the primary sleeping chamber are intentionally left for your choice. Amber was uncertain whether you would desire them. I wish you tranquility in your new start. Respectfully, Blake, I handed the message to my parent, who read it with lifted brows. She expressed when she finished, more depth to that young man than I credited. Yes, I concurred, though his future with Amber remains questionable based on his phrasing. As it should, Helen declared resolutely. A connection built on deceptions and manipulation offers a poor base for union. We completed our examination, verifying that all personal items had indeed been extracted, if somewhat haphazardly. As we prepared to depart, I paused in the center of the sitting room, taking a concluding look at the dwelling that had featured so prominently in our family history. Here, my dad had hosted weekly meals for decades. Here, Amber had taken her initial steps across the wooden floors. Here, family celebrations and milestones had been marked through years of changing situations. Saying farewell, Helen inquired mildly, noting my reflective position. In a way, I recognized, not just to the dwelling, but to what it symbolizes, the past. The version of parenting I've been clinging to, the notion that concession equals affection. And what will you greet? My parent inquired, her functional nature always seeking equilibrium. I grinned, feeling the burden of decades of parental duty beginning to lift. Opportunity, independence, a existence defined by my own selections rather than someone else's needs or anticipations. Good, Helen expressed resolutely. It's about time. As we secured the dwelling for the concluding time, I felt none of the sorrow I'd expected, only a growing assurance that the path ahead, while unfamiliar, offered liberation I'd long denied myself. In the driveway, my parent embraced me with surprising vigor for her 83 years. Travel safely, contact often, and don't reflect back too much. I won't, I vowed, returning her embrace. Care for yourself until I get established enough for you to visit. Oh, I will, she guaranteed me with the endurance that had carried her through decades of life's challenges. Alice Thompson and I are considering enrolling in a clay crafting session at the Elder Center. Never too late to experiment with clay, she says. This glimpse of my parents' continuing involvement with existence. Her refusal to stagnate even in her 80s bolstered my own resolve. If Helen Carter could embrace fresh experiences at 83, surely her offspring could re-envision her existence at 58. With a concluding wave, I commenced the journey south. The dwelling on Maple Avenue diminishing in my rear mirror. A structure that had sheltered 3 generations of our family, now passing to new proprietors who would create their own history within its walls. Ahead lay Richmond, Wilmington, Carolina Beach, and beyond those location markers, a future unburdened by anticipation or duty. A future entirely my own. For the first time in decades, the road ahead felt not like an extension of established patterns, but the commencement of something entirely novel. Monday morning discovered me in Wilmington, North Carolina, awakening to the distant cry of seabirds and the soft whisper of waves. My lodging, positioned along the Kafar River with vistas of the Atlantic beyond, offered a calm introduction to shoreline living, a stark contrast to the sentimental disturbance I'd left behind. I'd driven nearly 10 hours the prior day, stopping in Richmond only long enough to rest before continuing south. The steady pace of roadway travel had provided unexpected healing, each mile increasing the separation, not just geographically, but emotionally from the existence I was abandoning. Over morning meal on the lodging's riverside patio, I checked my device for the first time since yesterday afternoon. 23 unanswered calls, 12 from Amber, 5 from unfamiliar numbers. Likely ceremony attendees, still seeking clarifications. 3 from my sibling in Phoenix, 2 from Jonathan Mills verifying the residence finalization, and 1 from my parent. I listened to Helen's recorded message first. Sophia, it's Mom. Just verifying that you arrived in Richmond safely. Alice Thompson says her relative's ceremony was entirely destroyed by your theatrical action. Her words, not mine. I informed her some things matter more than small sandwiches and bubbly toasts. Anyway, travel carefully today. Contact when you arrive in Wilmington. I grinned at my parents' blunt defense of my actions, then dialed her number. Our conversation was short and functional. Yes, I'd arrived safely. Yes, I'd rested adequately. Yes, the climate was favorable for residence searching. The steadiness of her tone, so factual and steadfast, provided stability as I prepared to navigate my first complete day of this new phase. Jonathan's recorded messages verified that the residence finalization was advancing as planned. The purchasers completed their concluding inspection this morning. No problems reported. We'll authorize the documents at 2 p.m. my time, and the funds should be in your account by close of business. I've prepared a legal authorization as discussed, so you needn't return for the authorizing. I texted him a short recognition, then directed my attention to the 3 messages from my sibling, Claire. Unlike our parents' functional questions, Claire's recorded messages escalated from bewilderment to outrage to reluctant comprehension. Sophia, what's transpiring? I just received a strange call from Cousin Edward saying Amber's ceremony was terminated and you vanished. Respond then. Seriously, Sophia, I've now heard from 4 different kin with 4 different accounts of what occurred. One claims you had a psychological collapse. Another says Amber rejected you. And Aunt Patricia maintains you've joined a religious group. Whatever's happening, I deserve to hear it directly from you. And ultimately, sent late last night. Mom explained it to me. I understand now. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Contact when you're prepared to converse. Love you. I made a mental reminder to contact Claire later once I'd completed my meetings with the property agent. My sibling and I had never been particularly intimate. The 8-year age difference and her early union to a service officer who'd placed them far from our hometown had created more separation than just location, but her eventual backing was nonetheless reassuring. I deliberately left Amber's recorded messages unheard. Whatever entreaties or charges she'd left could wait until I felt sufficiently anchored in my new reality to receive them without being drawn back into old habits. At 10 o'clock exactly, Sandra Whitaker of Coastal Carolina Properties arrived at my lodging. A efficient woman in her 60s with mixed gray hair and the tanned skin of someone who spent considerable time outside, she greeted me with a solid grip and straightforward manner. Helen's offspring, she expressed, more assertion than inquiry. I see the similarity. Your parent and I worked on the Medical Facility Support Committee together before I relocated south 30 years ago. Impressive woman that she is. I concurred, immediately valuing Sandra's direct method. She mentioned you're seeking something on the water, permanent dwelling, not a holiday lease or investment asset. That's correct. Something simple but durable. I'd like to stroll on the shore every morning. Sandra nodded approvingly. Wise thinking. I'm displaying you 3 assets today. One in Carolina Beach, one in Cure Beach, and one a bit farther north in Wrightsville. Each has unique benefits. We'll begin with the smallest and progress upward if that works for you. As we traveled in Sandra's vehicle, she provided a continuous commentary on the shoreline neighborhoods, their populations, facilities, storm readiness measures, and social chances. The scenery passing outside my window offered a calming array of azure skies, sandy coasts, and coastal woods that felt worlds apart from the groomed suburbs I'd abandoned. The first asset, a compact 2-sleeping chamber bungalow in Carolina Beach, just 2 streets from the sea, enchanted me with its broad front veranda and luminous, breezy interior. Recently updated with practical synthetic plank flooring and stone surfaces, it offered immediate usability with minimal upkeep. Storm protectors installed last year, Sandra remarked as we toured the small but effective space. Resistant windows. New covering rated for 130-mile winds. Prior proprietor was a technician. Didn't skimp on the vital elements. I could envision myself here. Morning brew on the veranda. Afternoon strolls on the nearby shore. Evenings devoted to reading in the comfortable sitting room. The simplicity appealed after decades in a larger residence filled with the accumulated items of family existence. The second asset, a more roomy attached home in Cure Beach with direct sea vistas from an upper-level balcony, offered opulence I hadn't anticipated being able to manage. When Sandra mentioned the cost, nearly $100,000 more than the bungalow, I began to shake my head. Before you resolve, you should know this is a motivated vendor, she informed me. Separation circumstance needs to finalize quickly. They've already lowered the cost twice. Despite the appealing conditions, I couldn't quite connect with the asset's modern design and neighborhood rules. It's beautiful, I recognized, but doesn't feel like me. Sandra nodded, not astonished. I thought you might express that. The third asset is quite distinct. Older, more personality, directly on the water, but not on the primary shore. It's on the inlet side in Wrightsville with a private pier. Needs some refreshing, but has solid structure. As we traveled north toward Wrightsville Beach, I found myself growing increasingly at ease with Sandra's company. Unlike the excessively attentive property agents I'd encountered previously, she presented assets factually, highlighting both advantages and potential issues without sentimental influence. Your parent mentioned you're making a new beginning, she commented as we crossed the bridge to Wrightsville. Left some tough family circumstance behind. That's one way to express it, I recognized, surprised by Helen's revelation, but not offended. Sandra nodded reflectively. I did something comparable at 52. Left a 30-year union in Ohio. Relocated here knowing no one. Best choice I ever made. She glanced at me briefly. It's frightening at first, beginning over when everyone else seems established. But there's something empowering about selecting your own direction, especially when you've devoted decades accommodating others. This simple comprehension from someone who'd walked a similar path eased something tight within my chest. Did you ever regret it? I inquired. The split, the relocation? Not once, she answered without pause. Miss certain individuals? Certainly. Had tough days? Absolutely. But regret the choice? Never. We turned onto a narrow path bordered by ancient trees draped with hanging moss, their old branches creating a natural cover. At the end of the path stood a aged azure bungalow, its wide encircling veranda. Facing a calm expanse of water, where the inland waterway expanded into a small inlet. It's not seashore front, Sandra cautioned as we parked. The Atlantic is about a half-mile that direction, easy walking distance. But this, she motioned toward the shimmering water vista. This offers a different kind of serenity, less intense than sea waves, but perhaps more steady. The moment I stepped onto the veranda, something shifted inside me. A recognition, a sense of opportunity one hadn't expected. The bungalow itself was simple. 2 sleeping chambers, an open living dining space, a cooking area that had last been refreshed in the early 2000s, but its placement on the waterside lot and the quality of light filtering through mature trees created an atmosphere of calm refuge. The pier needs some repair, Sandra pointed out as we walked the asset. And the cooking area could use updating if you're inclined, but the covering is reliable, the base is excellent, and the flood level meets current standards. At the end of the pier, I stood watching a large blue bird hunting its meal in the shallows, its patient concentration symbolic of the leisurely pace of shoreline existence. In that instant, I could picture mornings devoted on this pier with brew and a volume, evenings observing spectacular sunsets across the water, nights listening to gentle rippling waves rather than suburban vehicles. The proprietor is an aging lady moving to supported living, Sandra explained as we returned to the bungalow. Her offspring reside elsewhere and desire a quick, uncomplicated transaction. She's owned it for 40 years, raised her family here during summers, then resided year-round after her spouse passed. Inside, the bungalow showed signs of its age and long occupancy. Faded window coverings, worn wooden floors, cooking area storage in a style popular decades ago. Yet, unlike the sterile perfection of the attached home, or the impersonal update of the first bungalow, this home carried a sense of past, of lives well experienced within its walls. In the main sleeping chamber, a large vista window overlooked the water, positioned perfectly to observe the dawn. I stood before it, imagining awakening to this vista each morning, a daily reminder of beauty and opportunity rather than duty and restriction. "What are you considering?" Sandra inquired, observing my reflective position. "I'm considering," I answered slowly, "that this place feels like it could become home. Not just a dwelling, but a home." Sandra grinned, the expression softening her functional demeanor. "That's not something you can fabricate with stone surfaces or metal devices. That feeling of correctness, of fitting, that's worth heeding." As we completed our tour, I found myself mentally placing my few cherished items within these rooms, imagining new furnishing setups, considering color schemes that would complement the water vistas. "I'd like to submit a proposal," I informed Sandra as we prepared to depart. "On this one, the Azure Bungalow," she nodded, not surprised. "I thought you might. Let's return to my workplace and prepare the documents. With the earnings from your home disposal, we could potentially finalize very quickly, within weeks rather than months." As we drove away, I turned for a concluding glimpse of the aged Azure Bungalow, my potential future residence. Unlike the dwelling on Maple Avenue with its load of family past and painful recollections, this simple structure offered something infinitely more precious. The promise of self-directed days and serene nights, free from the burden of unreasonable anticipations and unvalued concession. It wasn't the future I'd planned. It was perhaps something superior. 3 weeks passed in a flurry of documents, planning, and practical adaptations to shoreline existence. The proposal on the Azure Bungalow, officially named Heron's Rest, according to the aged sign hanging beside the front entrance, had been accepted without counters or complications. The aging proprietor, upon learning of my own new beginning, had even left several pieces of furnishing that suited the bungalow's personality better than any new acquisitions could have. The finalization had been straightforward, and with surprising speed, I found myself in possession of both a new residence and a new start. Sandra Whitaker had proven invaluable beyond her role as property agent, introducing me to dependable local workers, recommending everything from the finest seafood vendor to the most reliable coverage provider, and generally facilitating my integration into the shoreline community. Today marked the completion of the vital renovations I'd commissioned. Minor, but significant changes to make Heron's Rest truly mine. The cooking area now featured updated devices while preserving the charming original storage, merely refreshed with new fittings and coating. The washrooms had been modernized with efficient elements that maintained the bungalow's classic appeal. Most importantly, the pier had been professionally fixed and strengthened, ensuring safe access to the water that had so captivated me during my first visit. Standing at the end of that pier in the golden afternoon illumination, I felt the salt-scented wind against my features and marveled at how different my existence had become in just 1 month. The constant strain I'd carried in my shoulders for years had relaxed. The automatic checking of my device for messages from Amber had lessened. The habit of considering others' needs before my own had begun to release its hold. My device signaled with a text, not from Amber, whose messages I still couldn't bring myself to review, but from my parent. Worker finished with the pier. Still planning to collect me from the flight terminal tomorrow. I grinned, responding, "Pure as ideal. Flight still timely. We'll be there at 2:15. Helen had insisted on visiting once I was properly established. Her functional nature preventing her from making the trip until the renovations were complete and the bungalow fully operational. Tomorrow would mark her first visit to my new residence, a milestone I anticipated with both delight and a touch of unease. My parent had always been supportive, but she was also unapologetically truthful in her evaluations. As I returned to the bungalow to prepare supper, I noted the flashing indicator on my fixed-line message recorder. A deliberate outdated feature I'd installed after discovering my mobile reception could be inconsistent near the water. Pressing the control, I heard Jonathan Mills's measured tones. "Sophia, just checking in on the follow-up documents for the Maple Avenue disposal. Everything's concluded on our side, but there's one issue I wanted to address with you. Could you contact me when convenient? No rush, just a pending matter that needs handling." Curious, I dialed his number, grateful when he responded, despite the approaching end of the workday. "Jonathan, it's Sophia. You called about the residence disposal." "Ah, Sophia. Yes, thank you for responding promptly. How's shoreline existence treating you?" "Splendidly," I answered honestly. "I feel like I can inhale again." "Excellent. Well deserved, I'd say." He cleared his throat with the mild awkwardness that often marked his shifts to difficult subjects. "The purpose for my call, there's been a development concerning the residence on Maple Avenue. Nothing worrisome about the disposal itself," he added quickly, "but rather about something uncovered after you departed." My interest deepened. "What sort of development?" "The new proprietors were completing some pre-occupancy thorough cleaning and uncovered a concealed section in the primary sleeping chamber storage. Apparently behind a false barrier your dad had installed years ago. Inside was a secure storage key and papers indicating a container at First National that hasn't been accessed in over 15 years. My dad's financial institution," I murmured, memories emerging of accompanying him on weekend errands, waiting patiently in the entrance while he vanished into the secure area. I had no notion he maintained a secure storage container, nor did I, despite managing his holdings, Jonathan recognized. It wasn't referenced in any of his documents. The new proprietors very honorably surrendered the key and papers to me as the legal representative for the asset disposal. "That was honorable of them," I remarked, impressed by this unexpected honesty. "Indeed, I took the initiative to access the container yesterday as your legal agent." Jonathan's tone took on a more official quality. "Sophia, I believe you should be informed of its contents before deciding how to proceed." Something in his careful phrasing alerted me. "What did you uncover, Jonathan?" He paused briefly. "Several items of notable interest. First, a message from your dad addressed to you dated shortly before his passing. Second, papers regarding certain monetary setups he made concerning Amber. And third, what appears to be substantial proof of misconduct on the part of Amber's dad when he left your family." I sat down abruptly, the implications of Jonathan's measured words washing over me. "What kind of misconduct?" "The kind that typically involves authorities," Jonathan replied delicately. "Your dad appears to have gathered proof that David Monroe misappropriated significant funds from his employer before vanishing from your lives. From the papers, it seems your dad chose not to pursue the matter for your and Amber's sake, despite having enough proof to prompt legal charges." The disclosure struck like a bodily impact. David Monroe, the appealing, unreliable man who'd captivated me in my 20s, wed me impulsively, fathered Amber, then disappeared when she was 5, claiming commitment wasn't his style, a criminal escapee. It seemed simultaneously shocking and yet, in hindsight, perfectly aligned with his character. Why would my dad conceal this? I wondered aloud. Why not inform me at least? "His message addresses that inquiry," Jonathan said mildly. "I didn't review it fully. It was clearly private. But the opening section mentioned safeguarding both you and Amber from painful realities until certain suitable circumstances arose." My mind raced, linking disparate elements across decades. My dad's inexplicable generosity after David departed. The functional support that had kept Amber and me afloat during those tough early years. His occasional cryptic remarks about David receiving what he deserved eventually. His insistence on establishing learning funds for Amber that I couldn't access for other purposes. What does this signify for Amber? I inquired, parental concern automatically emerging despite recent events. Legally, nothing directly. The time limit for the financial offenses has expired based on my initial assessment. But the papers include something else that might be relevant to her personally. Proof suggesting David created a new persona in Arizona and may have begun another family there. My free hand gripped the edge of the cooking counter, steadying myself against this cascade of disclosure. Amber might have half-kin she knows nothing about. It appears feasible, Jonathan verified. The details are somewhat outdated, of course, but substantial enough that it could provide a starting point if she wished to explore further. I closed my eyes, processing the implications. After Amber's cruel denial and my consequent exit, would she even desire this details? Would it assist her comprehend certain patterns in her own conduct or merely inflict another source of agony? What would you recommend, Jonathan? He considered this thoughtfully. Professionally, I'd propose retrieving the contents of the secure storage and reviewing them privately before making any choices. Personally, he paused. The boundary between attorney and family acquaintance momentarily blurred. Personally, I believe your dad preserved these details for a reason, waiting for the appropriate moment. Perhaps that moment has arrived. After concluding the call, I stood at my cooking window, watching her wade in the shallows as evening neared. The serene scene contrasted sharply with the disturbance of my thoughts. Just when I'd begun establishing a new existence independent of old family interactions, this uncovering threatened to draw me back into Amber's sphere, not as the rejected parent, but as the carrier of potentially life-changing details. What duty did I have to share my dad's discoveries with a child who had instructed me to vanish from her existence? What authority did I have to withhold details that might help her comprehend her own history and inclinations? As darkness enveloped the water, I reached a choice. Tomorrow, after collecting my parent from the flight terminal, we would travel directly to Jonathan's workplace to retrieve the secure storage contents. Together, Helen and I would review my dad's message and the proof he'd compiled. Only then, with full comprehension of what my dad had preserved and why, would I decide what constituted my concluding parental duty to the child who had rejected me. What a small present I would leave in the vacant space between us before fully embracing my new start. Whatever that choice might be, it would be made from a position of power and clarity rather than response and pain. That alone represented advancement in my journey towards self-recovery. The flight terminal reunion with my parent proceeded with her characteristic speed. No theatrical hugs or excessive sentiment, just a firm embrace, functional questions about the drive, and immediate inquiries about my new residence. At 83, Helen Carter remained remarkably independent, managing her wheeled bag with determined self-reliance despite my offers of help. "You appear improved," she declared as we walked to the parking zone. "Less weighed down. The ocean air suits you." "It does," I concurred, realizing the accuracy in her assessment. The coastal setting had brought bodily changes. My skin had developed a healthy radiance from morning shore strolls. My posture had improved without the burden of constant strain. And I'd even begun allowing my hair to grow from its functional style into softer, more natural waves. "Jonathan Mills contacted me," Helen mentioned as we loaded her simple luggage into my vehicle. "Mentioned something about your dad's secure storage. Said we'd be stopping by his workplace." Yes, I verified, unsurprised that Jonathan had reached her directly. My parent and dad had been close acquaintances with the attorney for decades before my dad's death. It made sense that Jonathan would view her as an involved party in this uncovering. Apparently, Dad left some delicate details regarding Amber's dad. Helen's expression sharpened with curiosity. "David Monroe never trusted that man. Your dad had concerns about him that extended beyond his desertion of you and Amber." This captured my attention. "You knew about this, not details," she clarified as we began the drive toward downtown Wilmington, where Jonathan's workplace was located. "But I knew Robert was examining something. He was protective of you. Didn't want to add to your loads while you were already coping with lone parenting and a heartbroken 5-year-old. The disclosure that my parent had known, at least peripherally, about my dad's concerns added another layer to this developing family enigma. Why didn't you ever reference this? Helen shrugged mildly. Robert requested me not to. Said some realities serve no purpose unless situations make them necessary. I trusted his assessment. As we navigated through Wilmington's historic city center toward the adapted old building that housed Jonathan's legal practice, I wondered what situations my dad might have deemed necessary to warrant revealing his discoveries. Perhaps a moment precisely like this, when Amber's traits and choices had forced a fundamental reevaluation of our connection. Jonathan welcomed us into his workplace with the official politeness that characterized his professional manner, though his sincere fondness for my parent was evident in the way he attentively ensured she had the most comfortable seat. I've brought the contents of the secure storage, he explained, indicating an aged leather case on his desk. As I mentioned to Sophia, there are several parts: a private message, monetary papers, and proof regarding David Monroe's exit. Thank you for managing this so discreetly, I expressed, eyeing the case with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Of course, Jonathan hesitated, then added, I believe I fulfilled my professional duty by retrieving these materials and transferring them to you. What happens next is entirely your choice, Sophia. Would you prefer solitude to review the contents? I glanced at my parent, who sat alert and composed, her functional nature grounding what might otherwise feel like a dramatic scene from a suspense story. No need. Mom is family. Whatever Dad preserved concerns her grandchild. After all, Jonathan nodded, pushing the case toward me before excusing himself with a whispered comment about giving us time to process the materials. The case's leather was soft with age, the metal fastener dulled from years of neglect. Opening it revealed 3 distinct divisions, each carefully tagged in my dad's exact handwriting. For Sophia, David Monroe, Proof, and Amber's Fund. I began with the private message, removing several pages of thick paper covered in my dad's distinctive writing. The date at the top, March 17, 2007, placed it just 2 weeks before his sudden death from cardiac failure. Proceed, Helen encouraged softly. Read it aloud if you'd like. Inhaling deeply, I began. My dearest Sophia, if you're reviewing this message, situations have arisen that prompted Jonathan to share the contents of this secure storage with you. I've directed him to keep these materials protected until either I retrieve them myself, in which case you'll never see this message, or until a circumstance develops where this details becomes necessary for your welfare or Amber's. The timing of your uncovering is therefore meaningful, representing either my inability to resolve these issues during my lifetime or the emergence of situations I've long feared might eventually occur. What I've recorded here concerns David Monroe, the man who deserted you and Amber 15 years ago. His exit, which caused such agony and disruption in your lives, was not the spontaneous act of an immature man incapable of handling accountability as you've believed. It was a deliberate vanishing driven by a legal necessity. Shortly before David departed, I began noticing inconsistencies in his conduct. Costly acquisitions inconsistent with his declared earnings, late evening calls, increasing secrecy about his locations. My concerns prompted me to make inquiries through professional links, leading to a disturbing uncovering. David had been methodically misappropriating funds from Meridian Financial, where he worked in the bookkeeping department. When confronted privately with my suspicions, he neither affirmed nor refuted them, but within 48 hours, he had vanished from your lives. 3 days later, Meridian Financial uncovered the misappropriation. Nearly $425,000 missing through a complex scheme of falsified logs and redirected dealings. I faced a dreadful choice. Share this details with you and the officials, potentially subjecting you and 5-year-old Amber to a public disgrace and legal probe, or remain quiet, protecting you both from additional distress while allowing an offender to evade justice. I chose protection over justice, a choice I've questioned many times over the years. To compensate for my quiet, I privately replenished the stolen funds through an unnamed contribution to Meridian's overseeing company, preventing the economic damage David had inflicted without exposing his offenses publicly. My probes didn't conclude there. Through confidential channels, I traced David to Arizona, where he established a new persona as Daniel Matthews. The papers in this case provide proof of this change, including his union to Catherine Brennan in 2000 and the birth of two offspring, Emma, 2001, and Joshua, 2003. I've sustained this monitoring not out of spite, but from concern that David Daniel might someday attempt to reaccess your lives, potentially causing further injury. My contacts report that he has apparently stabilized sustaining legitimate work and family commitments in Phoenix for several years now. Whether this represents true change or merely deeper deceit, I cannot express. The question that has tormented me is whether Amber should know these realities about her dad. Would comprehending the reality of his exit provide healing context or simply inflict fresh injuries? Is offspring better served by protective illusions or difficult realities? I've ultimately concluded that this choice belongs to you, Sophia. You know your child's spirit and endurance better than anyone. The third division of this case contains papers of the fund I've established for Amber. Funds equivalent to what David took, set aside for her learning and future security. Whether you choose to explain the source of these funds is again your choice. If situations have prompted Jonathan to share these materials now, I trust that the timing is suitable and necessary. Whatever circumstance has developed, remember that your assessment has always been sound, your spirit unfailingly kind, and your endurance remarkable. With lasting affection and confidence in your insight, Dad, I lowered the message, my sight blurred with tears. My dad's voice, functional, reflective, deeply caring, seemed to fill the space, bridging the 15-year absence with immediate presence. He knew, I expressed ultimately, looking up at my parent. Somehow, he anticipated that someday I would require this details, that something might occur with Amber. Helen nodded, her own gaze suspiciously bright. Your dad was exceptionally perceptive about individuals and patterns. He probably recognized certain characteristics in Amber even when she was young. Tendencies inherited from David that might eventually create significant challenges. I considered this, recalling moments from Amber's youth and teenage years that had troubled me despite my parental inclination to see the best in her. The casual deceptions told for convenience, the manipulation of others' views, the selective presentation of facts to create desired impressions. Characteristics that had culminated in her elaborate deceptions about our family finances and her cruel denial when those deceptions were threatened. Heredity and environment, I murmured. All these years I've blamed myself for Amber's conduct. Wondered what I did incorrectly in nurturing her. How I failed to instill superior values. But perhaps some of these tendencies were inherited, encoded in her genetics from a dad who could methodically take from his employer and desert his family without apparent regret. That doesn't absolve her of accountability for her choices, Helen pointed out pragmatically. Comprehending origins isn't the same as excusing actions. No, I concurred, but it provides context and possibly guidance for what happens next. I directed my attention to the other divisions of the case, examining the meticulously organized proof my dad had compiled about David Monroe's offenses and subsequent reinvention as Daniel Matthews. Driver's permit copies, residence logs, work confirmations, even school enrollment forms for the half-kin Amber had never known existed, all presented with my dad's characteristic thoroughness. The concluding division labeled Amber's fund contained monetary papers establishing a learning reserve in Amber's name. The same reserve I had eventually used to finance her bachelor's and legal training, believing it to be simply my dad's generous present rather than a form of compensation for her dad's offenses. The question now, I expressed, securing the case after we had examined everything, is what to do with this details. Dad left the choice to me, but I'm not certain what serves Amber best at this point or what I'm obligated to share given our current separation. Helen considered this reflectively. What would you desire if you were in her position? The inquiry cut through my confusion with clarifying simplicity. If I were Amber, struggling to comprehend my own tendencies, potentially repeating destructive patterns without recognizing their origins, wouldn't I desire the chance to see myself more clearly through this knowledge? Not as in justification, but as an explanation that might enable superior choices moving forward. I'd desire to know, I expressed ultimately. Even if the reality was agonizing, I'd desire the opportunity to comprehend myself better through comprehending where I came from. Helen nodded, satisfied with my conclusion. Then I believe you have your response. As we prepared to depart Jonathan's workplace, the form of my concluding parental gesture toward Amber began to solidify. Not spiteful, not punitive, but clarifying, a present of reality that might illuminate the shadows of her own conduct, offering one last chance for growth, even as I continued my separate journey forward. The small present I would leave in the vacant space between us was taking shape, not a goodbye so much as a final offering. Whether Amber would recognize it as such remained to be seen. The week following my parents' arrival developed in a pleasant pace of displaying her my new existence. Morning strolls along the coastline, introducing her to locals who had already welcomed me cordially. Evenings on the pier observing spectacular sunsets color the sky in impossible hues. Helen approached shoreline existence with her typical functional evaluation, noting the moisture's effects on various materials, assessing local services with discerning thought, and ultimately declaring the Azure bungalow reasonably charming in what constituted high commendation from her pragmatic viewpoint. "You've done well here," she remarked on our fifth evening as we sat on the veranda with glasses of chilled beverage. "Not just with the asset, but with yourself. You're distinct." "Distinct how?" I inquired, curious about her view. "More present," she answered after careful thought. "For decades, you've been partially absent from your own existence, always anticipating someone else's requirements, always adjusting your responses to manage others' sentiments. Now you're fully here, inhabiting your moments rather than merely servicing them." The insight struck me with its precision. Throughout my union, lone parenting, and subsequent years, I had indeed existed in a state of divided focus, bodily present, but mentally occupied with calculations of others' necessities and anticipations. That constant internal oversight had become so habitual, I'd stopped noticing its drain on my vitality and genuineness. "I think you're accurate," I recognized. "There's a liberty in not constantly adjusting myself to accommodate someone else's story." Helen nodded, content with my recognition. "Now, about the David Monroe circumstance, have you decided how to advance?" I had, in fact, devoted considerable time contemplating this inquiry while displaying Helen around my new neighborhood. The case from my dad's secure storage remained on my workspace, its contents reviewed multiple times as I considered various methods. "I'm going to send Amber the details," I verified. "Not everything. Not Dad's private message to me or the monetary papers about the fund, but the proof about David's offenses and his new persona in Arizona, including the existence of her half-kin. She deserves to know that portion of her history." "And how will you convey this details?" Helen inquired, given that you've had no interaction since the ceremony day. This inquiry had occupied much of my thought. A direct gathering seemed inadvisable, too charged with sentimental potential, too likely to descend into blame or manipulative entreaties. Digital transmission felt impersonal for something so meaningful. Traditional posts seemed too easily dismissed or discarded. "I've decided on a specific method," I explained. "Jonathan is assisting me organize it." The following morning, after Helen and I enjoyed morning meal on the pier, I drove to a local reproduction shop where I had arranged to create a carefully selected presentation of the vital papers from my dad's assortment. The result was a fastened case, professional, objective, neither blaming nor regretful in its arrangement. I included a brief opening message explaining the recent uncovering of my dad's secure storage and his long-ago probe into David Monroe's vanishing. The tone remained neutral, focused on providing details rather than opinion. I carefully avoided any reference to Amber's conduct toward me or the similar patterns between her dad's deceptions and her own. The concluding page contained the current location and contact details for Daniel Matthews, formerly David Monroe, and his family in Phoenix, verified as precise through Jonathan's discreet questions. Whether Amber chose to start contact with her dad and half-kin would be entirely her choice. I was simply providing the possibility. With the case complete, I returned to Heron's Rest where Helen waited with assembled bags. Her week-long visit concluding that afternoon. As I drove her to the flight terminal, she posed the inquiry I'd been expecting. When will you convey the case to Amber? Tomorrow, I answered. Jonathan has organized everything. A messenger will convey it to the address where she and Blake are currently residing, his parents' additional dwelling, apparently. Helen nodded, absorbing these details. And if she contacts afterward, if she calls or attempts to visit. This possibility had featured prominently in my thoughts. If Amber responded with genuine self-examination and sincere remorse, how would I navigate potential reconciliation while sustaining the healthy limits I'd established? Conversely, if she reacted with rejection or ire, dismissing the details as irrelevant or attacking me for sharing it, how would I protect my newfound serenity? I don't know, I confessed honestly. I suppose I'll assess that circumstance if it arises. But the case includes no invitation for interaction, no suggestion of reconciliation, no requests for apology. It simply details she has the right to know, presented without plan. Very tactful, Helen noted. And the vacant residence? You mentioned something about leaving a special item there before the new proprietors took possession. I grinned, recalling the concluding detail. Jonathan had organized at my request. Yes, that's being managed this afternoon. After seeing my parent off at the flight terminal with promises of another visit during the celebrations, I returned to my bungalow feeling strangely buoyant. Tomorrow the case would be conveyed to Amber. My concluding parental act, neither vindictive nor self-sacrificing. Today, another gesture was being completed at the vacant residence on Maple Avenue. Jonathan had verified that the new proprietors had agreed to a concluding inspection delay of 24 hours to accommodate a special conveyance to the empty asset. The tidying crew had completed their work days earlier, leaving the residence immaculate and vacant, ready for its new occupants. Except for one carefully positioned item in the center of the sitting room floor. I'd selected a simple wooden container crafted by a local Wilmington maker, its surface smooth and warm to the touch. Inside, I'd placed a single image, Amber at 5 years old, sitting on my dad's lap as he read her a tale. The picture captured the moment before darkness entered her existence through her dad's desertion, before patterns of deceit and entitlement had hardened into her adult character. Beneath the image lay a small sealed cover containing a handwritten note with just 3 lines. Every tale has beginnings beyond our control. Every existence offers chances to surpass them. Select wisely. No authorization, no charge, no entreaty for reconciliation or expression of continuing pain. Simply an invitation to consciousness, the most valuable present I could offer after years of enabling through quiet and concession. According to Jonathan's arrangements, Blake would be informed about a concluding item requiring attention at the vacant residence. Given Amber's recent avoidance of functional duties, it would likely be Blake who arrived to uncover the container positioned exactly where Amber had stood when she'd instructed me to vanish from her existence. What happened after that uncovering was beyond my control or duty. Whether Amber recognized the chance for growth contained in both the case and the simple wooden container, whether she chose to examine her own patterns in light of her dad's history, whether she eventually sought interaction or sustained our separation. All these results belong to her path now, not mine. At sunset, I received a text from Jonathan. Conveyance completed at Maple Avenue. Messenger scheduled for case tomorrow at 10 a.m. I sent a brief recognition, then set my device aside and walked down to the pier where the evening illumination gilded the water's surface. A pair of birds waited in the shallows, their patient focus a lesson in presence and acceptance. For 28 years, my identity had been inextricably linked to parenting, to Amber's requirements, achievements, and eventually her denial. That phase had now conclusively ended with my concluding parental offerings. Reality about her dad and an invitation to self-consciousness delivered without anticipation or demand. What opened before me now was a phase entirely my own. Our existence defined by my selections rather than others' necessities. The Azure Bungalow with its aged charm and serene waterside. The new neighborhood beginning to embrace me as a local and potential acquaintance. The creative pursuits I'd long postponed, but recently begun exploring again. As darkness settled over the water and stars emerged in the clearing heavens, I felt no regret for the family bonds that had broken, only gratitude for the self I was reclaiming in their absence. Whatever Amber chose to do with the knowledge I'd provided, whether it prompted development or rejection, interaction, or continued quiet, her journey belonged to her now. Mine stretched before me like the star-reflected waters of the inland waterway, mirroring both past and opportunity, but flowing inevitably forward toward horizons I was finally free to explore on my own conditions. The most terrible parent a person could endure. Perhaps in Amber's distorted view, but for myself, I had become something far more crucial. A woman who had ultimately learned that self-esteem is not selfishness, that limits are not disloyalty, and that the most genuine form of affection sometimes requires departing rather than accepting ongoing injury. That knowledge hard-won through agony, but ultimately freeing, was perhaps the most valuable present of